Commander Elias Rourke had lived on Horizon's Wake for 20 years, and in all those years not once had he spoken to a human woman face to face. The research station floated on the edge of a dying star, its orbit caught in a strange balance that only humans seemed able to endure. Other species came and went, delegates, scientists, engineers, but none of them were human women. For Elias, the absence had become part of the silence of the station, as natural as the hum of its engines or the flicker of the failing star outside the viewport. When Elias had first arrived, he thought the assignment would last only a few years. He remembered stepping onto the platform as a young officer, his eyes still bright with hope, telling himself that service here would be a stepping stone to something greater. The station had been alive then, bustling with excitement, full of strange technologies and new ideas. He told himself the loneliness would be temporary, yet the years slipped by. The requests for transfer were always denied. His hair turned silver, his face weathered with lines, and still he remained, the quiet commander of a station few even remembered existed. The absence of women was never an official rule, yet it had become reality. The frontier demanded sacrifices, and most of those posted here were men who volunteered, perhaps because they had no families to leave behind or no ties strong enough to keep them planetside. Some joked about it in the early years, calling Horizon's Wake the monastery in the stars, but over time the jokes dried up. No one laughed anymore. Instead, they worked, they slept, they aged. A rhythm of silence wrapped around them all. Elias often walked the narrow corridors at night when most of the crew were sleeping. The air recyclers whispered softly, and the distant pulse of the star painted the windows in deep crimson light. He would pause sometimes at the main observation deck, staring at the endless fire outside. It reminded him of Earth sunsets he could barely remember now, though he tried to hold the memory close. He thought of the smell of rain, of laughter in crowded streets, of a voice calling his name in tones warmer than machinery could ever echo. In the quiet, those memories became both comfort and ache. The aliens who came to Horizon's Wake fascinated him, though. Every few months, new delegations arrived from distant systems. Some were insectoid, clicking and hissing as they scuttled through the halls. Others shimmered with scales or feathers, their bodies glowing with natural light. A few carried strange scents of forests or oceans far from here. They spoke many languages, though all found a way to communicate. Elias respected them, even enjoyed learning from them, but they were not human. None of them filled the space left in him. None could. It was not desire alone that haunted him. It was the absence of balance. Humanity, he thought, was meant to live in a dance of difference. Men and women, voices and laughter, the interplay of presence. Without that balance, the station felt incomplete, as though half of life's music had been silenced. He saw it in his men as well. They grew quieter with every year. Conversations dwindled to the necessities of duty. Smiles grew rare. The fire of youth dimmed. It was as though the station itself drained color from them. Yet Elias endured. That was what humans did. Others might break under loneliness, but he carried it like a cloak. Some nights he wrote letters he never sent. Some mornings he read old novels that reminded him of Earth. And always he kept order. The station needed him steady, and so he was steady. Perhaps that was why humanity alone could survive here. Their strange resilience, the ability to keep walking forward long after the path had turned barren, was the reason Horizon's Wake had not fallen into ruin. There were moments, however, when even his strength trembled. In the dining hall, he sometimes caught the look of a younger crewman staring at nothing. His fork paused mid-air, his eyes wet with a memory he could not share. In those moments, Elias wanted to say something, anything, but words felt fragile. Instead, he sat nearby, a quiet anchor, hoping his presence alone reminded them they were not alone in their solitude. He wondered if they saw him as a symbol, or merely as another man enduring the same endless years. Outside, the star pulsed again, throwing ribbons of light against the hull. Elias leaned against the glass and watched it burn. It was beautiful in its way and terrible. Like the loneliness, it had become a companion to him. He could not hate it. He could only acknowledge it, breathe through it, and continue. 20 years. He thought the number as though saying it in his mind would make it real. 20 years without a woman's voice, a woman's laughter, a woman's presence to balance the endless march of days. 20 years of silence in that part of life. He wondered sometimes if he had forgotten how to speak to one. If he even would know what to say should the universe one day decide to bring such a presence back into his world. He told himself it did not matter. He had his duty. He had his crew. He had the star burning itself to death but somehow holding the station steady in its gravity, and for 20 years that was enough. Or so he told himself. The supply ship drifted into docking orbit like a silver bird crossing the fire-lit sky. Commander Elias Rourke stood at the viewing port as it connected, the long mechanical arms of Horizon's wake guiding it into place. Supply days were rare, almost like holidays for the crew, though the excitement was usually short-lived. Cargo would be unloaded, documents signed, and a new batch of alien delegates or researchers would step through the airlock. Most would stay for months, sometimes weeks, then leave again when the station's harsh orbit grew too heavy for them to endure. Elias prepared himself for the usual routine, but when the doors slid open, something unusual happened. Among the delegation of shimmering figures stepped a being unlike any Elias had ever seen. She was tall and slender, her skin glimmering as though woven from glass and silver with light shifting beneath its surface. Her eyes glowed softly, reflecting not just the light of the corridor but something deeper. As though she carried her own fire within, she moved with quiet grace, yet every step seemed intentional, like a dancer tracing an unseen pattern. The other aliens bowed slightly as she entered, and Elias realized this was no ordinary visitor. She belonged to the Valari, a species rarely seen so far from their own territories. He had read about them in old mission reports, empaths able to sense emotions with uncanny clarity. They were said to be both gentle and unsettling, for they understood more about others' feelings than most beings cared to admit. She paused when her gaze fell on Elias. For a moment, her expression was unreadable, then her lips curved in something close to a smile. It was not the same as a human smile, but it carried warmth. "You are human," she said, her voice like the ringing of crystal touched by wind. "I have waited to meet one of your kind here." Elias inclined his head, his tone formal as always. "I am Commander Elias Rourke. Welcome to Horizon's wake. You must be the new Valari envoy." She nodded gently. "I am called Serenai." Her words carried a rhythm unlike the others, a careful harmony that made each syllable linger. The aliens behind her began unpacking their equipment, speaking in quick tones, but her attention stayed fixed on Elias. He felt a strange stillness, as though the air around him had changed. For 20 years, every new arrival had been another shape, another face, another culture to study and catalog. But this was different. He had seen alien beauty before, but Serenai carried a presence that felt strangely human, though she was clearly not. Something in her eyes reminded him of the warmth he had not seen in decades. The days that followed only deepened the strangeness. Serenai was not like the other delegates. She did not hide away in laboratories or spend long hours buried in equipment. Instead, she wandered the station's halls learning about the humans who lived there. She stopped to speak with engineers and cooks, with technicians and guards, always asking questions about their feelings, their memories, their ways of enduring. Many were startled by her directness, but she listened with patience and without judgment. Slowly the crew warmed to her, yet it was Elias she lingered near most often. He would find her in the observatory, staring at the dying star, her crystalline skin catching its light. She would turn as he entered, as though expecting him, and begin to ask questions that made him pause. "Do you feel the silence when you sleep?" she once asked. Another time, "When the years pass and you are still here, what holds you steady?" At first, Elias gave the same practical answers he always gave. Duty, responsibility, the need to keep his crew alive. But Serenai seemed unconvinced. "Those are the words of your mind," she said softly. "But I ask about your heart." He was not used to such questions. For 20 years, feelings had been folded away, hidden under layers of command. To expose them felt dangerous, almost impossible. Yet when she looked at him with eyes that seemed to see beneath his silence, he wondered if she already knew more than he admitted to himself. The crew noticed, too. They whispered quietly in corridors, not with jealousy but with curiosity. For years, no woman's presence had graced Horizon's wake. Now there was this alien girl who glowed softly in the star's fading light. And for some reason, she had chosen to spend her time with their commander. It gave the station a new kind of energy, a ripple of life that none had expected. One evening, as the station drifted in its endless orbit, Elias stood once again in the observation deck. The star pulsed faintly, casting the room in shades of red and gold. He thought he was alone, but then he heard the soft sound of her steps. She came to stand beside him without a word, gazing at the fire. After a long silence, she spoke. "Your kind is different, I feel it. Humans hold storms inside them, but still they walk forward. Even here, after 20 years, you do not break." She turned her face toward him, her light catching the reflection of the star. "I wish to know why. I wish to know what it is you carry." Elias had no answer. He froze, his breath caught in his chest. For 20 years, no one had asked him such a question. Not a fellow officer, not a visiting delegate, not even himself. In her voice there was no command, no order, only quiet expectation. And in that moment, for the first time in decades, he felt something stir within him, something long buried but not forgotten. The station's nights were long, though night was only a word for the hours when the artificial lights dimmed. Horizon's Wake never truly slept, but there were moments when the halls grew quiet, and only the soft hum of engines and distant machinery filled the air. It was in such an hour that Elias found himself in the observatory again, alone with the endless fire of the star. He had come there countless times before, yet tonight felt different. He did not know why until the door slid open and Scifi entered. She walked with the same silent grace as always, her steps so light it seemed the floor barely knew she touched it. Without asking, she joined him at the wide glass panel where the star glowed. For a long while, neither spoke. The dying sun flared, its crimson waves stretching into the dark, and its light reflected in her crystalline skin until she seemed part of the fire itself. Elias tried to remain calm, but he felt the shift in the air. With her near, silence was no longer empty. It was heavy with meaning. Finally, she turned her gaze toward him. "You are different from the others," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "Different in what way?" "I am no more than my crew." Her head tilted slightly as though she were listening to something only she could hear. "No, you are steady. The others bend beneath their loneliness, but you do not. I have watched them. I have watched you. You walk through silence as though it is a path you know well." Elias gave a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. 20 years here will teach a man how to walk in silence. There's little choice in the matter." Her eyes glimmered faintly. Choice is always present. Many would have broken. Many would have begged to leave.
Yet you remain.
Not only remain, you lead. That is not the silence teaching you. That is you teaching yourself. Her words unsettled him, not because they were untrue, but because they touched too close to something he had long buried. For years he had carried his loneliness quietly, never admitting the weight of it even to himself. Now here was this alien, speaking it aloud as though it were written plainly on his face. Scifi took another step closer. "I have studied many species. I know how they endure, how they bend and shatter, but your kind is different. You hold pain and you keep walking. Even now I can feel it." She paused, her voice softer still. "I wish to understand." Elias turned his gaze back to the star, unwilling to meet her eyes. "There is nothing to understand. It is only survival." But she shook her head gently. "No, it is not. Survival is breathing, eating, keeping flesh alive. You do more than that. You carry emptiness and still keep meaning. You laugh at times when there is no reason to laugh. You lead when your own strength runs thin. You tell yourself you have nothing, yet you still give to those around you. That is not survival. That is something else." Her words hung in the air, wrapping around him like a net. Elias opened his mouth to respond, but the words would not come. For 20 years, no one had spoken to him like this. No one had dared to cut through the armor of command to ask about the man beneath. He felt exposed in a way that no battlefield, no starstorm had ever left him. Then came the moment that froze him. Scifi leaned closer, her glowing eyes fixed on him with quiet intensity. "You know what to do, human," she said. Elias froze. The words struck him deeper than they should have, simple as they were. He did not know what she meant, whether it was to speak, to confess, to finally admit the loneliness he had carried like a second skin. Yet somehow he felt she did not mean just one thing. She meant everything he had denied himself for 2 decades. His throat tightened. He searched for words, but his mind felt blank. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady thrum of the station's heart. She waited, unhurried, her gaze never leaving him, as though the answer she sought could not be found in words but in what he would choose to reveal. He thought of the years, 20 years of empty corridors, 20 years of duty and silence, 20 years without balance. He thought of the faces of his men, of their weary eyes, of the way they looked to him as though his strength alone kept them from falling apart. He thought of Earth, of a world he had not touched in so long, of laughter he had not heard since youth. And he thought of the alien girl beside him, who somehow in mere days had stirred more within him than years of endurance had allowed. His chest ached, not with pain, but with something he could not name. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was both. He realized then why he had frozen. It was not that he did not know what to do. It was that he had forgotten how. Scifi seemed to sense this. She did not press him further. Instead, she lifted her gaze back to the star. "When you are ready," she said quietly, "you will remember. And when you do, I will be here." They stood in silence after that, watching the fire burn, two figures alone in the vastness of space. For the first time in 20 years, Elias felt that perhaps he was not as alone as he had always believed. The days after that strange moment in the observatory carried a new weight for Elias. He walked the station as he always did, checking systems, listening to reports, ensuring every shift ran smoothly, but something inside him had changed. Serene's words echoed in his mind like a pulse he could not silence. "You know what to do, human." He repeated the phrase over and over, trying to decide if she had meant duty, confession, or something deeper still. Serene did not rush him. She moved through the station with her quiet grace, speaking with the crew, watching them with eyes that seemed to read beyond their words. Wherever she went, the air shifted. The men straightened their backs, their voices softened, and for the first time in years, Horizon's wake carried a subtle undercurrent of life. Some laughed a little more, some shared stories they had long kept buried. It was as if her presence had unlocked doors inside them that even they had forgotten were closed. One evening, Elias found her seated in the mess hall, though she had no food in front of her. The hall was mostly empty, save for a few crewmen lingering at the far end. Serene was listening to an engineer telling her about his childhood on Earth, about the scent of pine forests and the feeling of rain against his skin. She leaned forward as he spoke, her glowing eyes fixed on him with a warmth that made the man's face brighten, even as his voice trembled with memory. When he finished, she reached across the table and touched the back of his hand lightly as if to say she understood. Elias had seen that man in silence for years, yet now his shoulders were lifted, his eyes shining with something close to peace. Later, when the hall had emptied, Elias approached her. "You seem to know what to say to them," he remarked. She looked up at him, her skin shimmering faintly under the dim lights. "It is not words. It is listening. Your kind has carried so much silence that even small memories are like rivers hidden beneath stone. When they speak, I feel the water rushing free." Elias sat across from her, his brow furrowed. "You keep saying you're kind. What is it that you think makes us so different?" She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Most species I know bend under loneliness. They are meant to live in constant connection, in shared thought, in groups where no one is left apart. But you humans are strange. You can be alone for years, decades even, and though it leaves marks, you do not fall apart. You carry your emptiness like a vessel, and inside it you keep your fire alive." Elias leaned back, thoughtful. "Fire," he repeated. "That's an old human word for spirit, for will. But I don't think of myself as carrying fire. I think of it as just refusing to stop." She smiled, faint and soft. "That refusal is your fire. Others cannot hold it. I can feel the storms inside you, Elias. The loneliness, the years, the weight of command. And yet you are steady. This is what I wish to learn, how you endure." Her words left him quiet. He had never considered endurance itself as something worth studying. For him it had been necessity, nothing more. But in her gaze he saw genuine wonder, as though what he had taken for survival was, to her people, a rare and precious gift. Over the next days, their conversations deepened. In the observatory, she asked him to tell her stories of Earth, its forests, its oceans, the sound of cities alive with voices. In the engine bay, she questioned the crew about the moments that gave them strength. One admitted it was the memory of his mother singing a lullaby. Anut. Her said it was the image of a daughter waiting on Earth. Each story Serenai listened to as though it were treasure. The crew began to notice something unusual about themselves. Their burdens felt lighter after speaking to her. Men who had carried 20 years of silence began to share old memories in quiet corners, not in complaint, but as reminders of what they still carried inside. Elias watched this change unfold with cautious hope. For the first time in 2 decades, his men seemed alive again. One night, as they stood again before the dying star, Elias finally asked, "Why does this matter to you? Why seek us out if all we do is endure?" Serene's gaze stayed fixed on the burning light beyond the glass. "Because my people cannot endure as you do. We are empaths. We feel deeply, but when the silence grows long, it consumes us. We cannot bear emptiness. But you turn silence into strength. You carry it, and somehow you keep meaning alive inside it. That is why I am here. To learn from you, Elias. To learn from humanity." Her voice was soft, yet it struck him with surprising force. He had thought his years of quiet endurance were nothing but a burden, a curse of duty. But now she spoke of it as a gift, something that might hold value beyond his own survival. For the first time, he wondered if humanity's strength was not in their technology, not in their armies or ships, but in this strange ability to endure, to carry hope, even in silence. Elias did not reply at once. He only stood beside her, watching the star flicker, its fire fading but not yet gone. Perhaps he thought the same could be said of himself. The warning came without drama, only a soft chime echoing through the halls of Horizon's Wake. Elias was in his quarters when the light on the wall changed from pale blue to steady amber. He froze for a moment, then rose quickly, his years of training guiding his body before his mind had time to think. The station rarely changed its alert lights unless something important had shifted outside. When he reached the command deck, the air already carried tension. Officers bent over their consoles, voices low but quick, their fingers moving across controls with practiced speed. The massive viewing screen showed the star, once calm in its slow dying, now shuddering with unexpected energy. Waves of light rippled outward in uneven bursts, brighter and more violent than before. "What is it?" Elias asked, his voice calm but firm. The science officer turned, his face pale. "Sir, the star's collapse has accelerated. The models were wrong. We thought we had decades before it reached this stage, but..." He hesitated, then added, "It could be weeks, maybe days before the orbit becomes unstable." The words settled over the room like a heavy stone. Elias felt the weight press into his chest, but his face remained steady. "Then we keep the station balanced. No panic. Give me the reports on shield fluctuations and energy intake." Orders passed from his lips with practiced clarity. The crew straightened, their fear folding back into discipline. They moved faster now, but with direction. For years they had lived in silence, but the crisis reminded them why they were here, to hold the station in place. No matter what the star decided to do, as the men worked, Elias felt Serene's presence behind him. He did not need to turn to know she was watching. Her quiet gaze seemed to reach through the room like unseen threads, calming even those who had begun to tremble. At last she spoke, her voice low but steady. "The fear here is strong, but you hold it still." "How do you do this, Elias?" He kept his eyes on the data streaming across the screen. "Because fear changes nothing. Panic doesn't save lives. Steadiness does." Her head tilted slightly as if she were listening deeper. "You carry the fear inside, but do not let it control you. That is your strength." Hours passed as the station adjusted to the star's new rhythm. Shields were reinforced, orbit calculations adjusted, and unnecessary systems powered down to conserve energy. Outside, the star pulsed brighter, its light flooding the halls in shades of red and gold. Each time it flared, the crew flinched. But Elias stood tall at the center of the command deck, his voice even, his presence an anchor. Later, when the worst of the adjustments had been made, Serene joined him in the observatory. The star's glow filled the room, fierce and alive. "I saw them," she said softly. "Your crew. They looked to you as if your calm was their own. When you did not break, they did not break." Elias nodded slightly, though his eyes stayed fixed on the burning fire. That is what command is. To stand when others cannot. Her gaze lingered on him. But most species cannot. They would shatter even with a leader. Yet your kind has this gift, to carry storms, to let others share in your strength. Elias exhaled slowly. Maybe that's what it means to be human. To keep walking forward even when the ground shakes beneath you. To hold steady until the storm passes. She stepped closer, her voice soft as crystal ringing. "This is what I came to learn. Not words, not theories, but this. The fire of endurance in the middle of collapse. The next day tested them even further. A wave of radiation struck unexpectedly, shaking the hull and sending alarms through every deck. The aliens aboard, unused to such stress, struggled to keep control of themselves. One group huddled in the corridors, their voices rising in fear. Another froze at their stations, unable to move. Elias moved among them, his voice steady, guiding them back to focus. He told them where to go, what to do, how to breathe through the fear. His presence alone seemed to ground them. When it was over, he returned to the command deck, exhausted but unshaken. Scifi stood waiting. Her eyes shone with something deeper than curiosity now. Respect. Awe. You call it duty, she said quietly, but I see more. I see the fire that keeps a universe alive when all else falls apart. Humanity carries it even when you do not see it yourselves. Elias met her gaze for a long moment, unsure what to say. He had spent 20 years telling himself endurance was nothing but necessity. Now with her words, he began to wonder if endurance was itself a gift, not only for him but for all who stood beside him. The star pulsed again, fierce and unstable, but Horizon's wake held steady in its orbit. And so did Elias Rourke, human among stars, steady as the fire within him. The storm of the star had passed for now, leaving Horizon's wake wrapped in an uneasy calm. Repairs were underway, the crew moving through the halls with quiet focus. Yet even in their silence, Elias could see a change in them. The fear that had shaken them only days ago seemed softer now, replaced with a cautious kind of pride. They had faced the fury of the dying sun and endured, and deep down, Elias knew they had endured not only because of themselves, but because of the strength they drew from one another. He found Scifi in the research wing, standing before a glowing console filled with shifting patterns of light. She turned when he entered, her crystalline skin catching the glow of the screens until she looked like a figure carved from starlight. For a moment she studied him without speaking, as if reading more in his face than his words could reveal. You were calm when all others shook, she said softly. I felt it. Even when fear surged in every heart around you, you held steady. Do you know what that means, Elias? He frowned slightly, though his voice remained even. It means I did my duty. Nothing more. She shook her head gently. It means you carry something that others cannot. Humanity has a strength beyond survival. You keep meaning alive even in emptiness. That is rare. That is what I came here to find. Elias folded his arms, uneasy under her gaze. You speak as if endurance is some kind of treasure. But it isn't. It's simply what we must do. When there's no other choice, you endure. Her eyes glowed with quiet intensity. No, Elias, choice is always present. Many break. Many surrender to despair. But your kind does not. Even in silence, even in loss, you keep walking. That is more than survival. That is hope carried through storms. Her words settled over him, and he found himself unable to dismiss them as easily as before. He thought of his men, their long silence, their sudden laughter when Scifi had listened to their stories, the way they had steadied themselves during the star's flare. Perhaps there was something there beyond simple necessity. Perhaps humanity's refusal to fall apart in the face of emptiness was its own kind of strength. Scifi stepped closer. My people cannot endure as you do. We are empaths. We feel deeply, but when we are alone, we collapse. The silence becomes too heavy. Other species are the same in their own ways. They require constant connection, constant balance. But you humans, you can carry emptiness without letting it destroy you. That is why you survive where others cannot. That is why this station has lasted so long. Elias studied her, searching for words. He had thought himself cursed by these 20 years, marked by loneliness no man should have to bear. Yet here she was, telling him it was not a curse but a gift. He struggled to accept it. You make it sound noble, he said at last. But it doesn't feel noble, it feels heavy. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. It is heavy, but you carry it. That is the difference. And when you carry it, you give others strength. Did you not see your men during the storm? They looked to you, Elias. When you stood, they remembered they could stand too. He looked away, his gaze falling on the glowing screens. Maybe, but that doesn't make me special. It only makes me human. Scifi smiled faintly, her crystalline features catching the light. Exactly. That is why the universe needs you. Her words struck him harder than the star's flare. The universe needed humanity, not for their machines, not for their weapons, but for this strange ability to endure, to keep walking forward when all else failed. It was a thought he had never considered, one that made the years of silence take on new meaning. Later, in the mess hall, Elias watched his crew. They were tired, yes, but he noticed how they spoke in low voices, sharing memories of Earth, stories they had never told before. He saw a spark in their eyes, something that had been missing for years. It was as though the storm had awakened something in them, reminding them of who they were. He realized then that what Scifi said might be true. Humanity's gift was not brilliance or strength of body. It was the quiet fire that carried them through storms. It was the refusal to break, even when the universe grew silent around them. That night, back in the observatory, Scifi stood beside him again. The star pulsed faintly, its dying light washing across their faces. She spoke without turning. "You asked me why it matters. Now I will tell you. Because the universe is filled with silence. Stars die, worlds fall quiet, and even civilizations fade. Most cannot face that silence. But your kind can. You keep meaning alive even in emptiness. That is why you are needed." Elias felt her words sink deep into him. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder if perhaps his 20 years were not wasted. If perhaps his endurance had been more than personal survival. Maybe it was proof of something larger, something every human carried within. He did not reply. Instead, he stood with her in the quiet, the fire of the star reflecting in his eyes. And in that silence, he no longer felt entirely alone. The dying star grew weaker with every passing cycle. Its great flares had softened, but its light carried the heaviness of a fire almost gone. Horizon's wake floated in its orbit like a fragile lantern beside a collapsing flame. For the crew, life went on. Repairs, rotations, daily routines, but beneath all of it was a quiet understanding. Time was not endless here. Change was coming. Elias felt it more than anyone. 20 years of silence had taught him to listen to things left unsaid. And the air now carried an unspoken truth. The station had survived storms, yet the star's decline would one day end its balance. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but soon. And in that truth lay another. He had carried loneliness long enough to know it was not the end. Endurance itself had meaning. One evening he returned again to the observatory. It had become the place where everything seemed to happen, where silence spoke, where the dying light revealed hidden truths. He found Scifi already there, gazing into the red glow. She turned as he entered, and her faint smile welcomed him as though she had been waiting. "You look tired," she said softly. Elias gave a small shrug. 20 years will do that to a man. Her eyes glimmered like crystal catching firelight. "And still you stand." For a long moment they were quiet, both watching the star as if listening to its final song. Then Scifi spoke again. "I have learned much here, Elias, more than I expected. My people will ask me what I discovered, and I will tell them this. Humans endure not because they are unfeeling, but because they carry their feelings through silence. That is your gift." Elias lowered his gaze. "A gift," he repeated. Strange word for what felt like a burden all these years. She stepped closer, her voice soft but clear. "It is both. A burden and a gift. But it is also why the universe needs you. Do you not see? When stars fade, when worlds fall, when even hope seems gone, it is your kind who will keep walking. And because you walk, others will follow." He met her gaze, and for the first time he did not look away. There was no hiding from her eyes. She saw through him, and somehow, that no longer unsettled him. Instead, it steadied him. Perhaps that was what companionship truly was. Not to erase loneliness, but to share it in a way that made it bearable. The days that followed carried a new energy through Horizon's wake. The crew worked not with the dull rhythm of duty, but with a quiet determination. Stories were told more often now. Laughter returned in small bursts, and the silence of the station felt less heavy. Elias noticed it in their eyes, the recognition that they were part of something larger than themselves. One afternoon, while overseeing the docking bay, Elias watched a departing transport carrying alien delegates back to their worlds. For years, the station had been seen as a lonely post at the edge of nowhere. Now word had spread among the visitors. Humans were not merely caretakers of a station. They were carriers of something greater. Other species wanted to understand. Some wanted to learn. A few even whispered of alliances built not on weapons or trade, but on the quiet strength humanity possessed. Elias stood silently as the ship left, its engines a bright trail against the fading star. He felt the weight of 20 years still on his shoulders, but for the first time, it did not feel wasted. It felt like proof. Proof that humans, in their strange way, had something the galaxy could not replace. That night in the observatory, Sarah Nye stood beside him again. "Do you understand now?" she asked gently. Elias took a slow breath. "I think I do. Maybe endurance is not just survival. Maybe it is the fire that keeps meaning alive. Maybe that is why we are here." She nodded, her light shimmering faintly. "Yes, that is why I came. To see it for myself, to feel it. And now I know it is real." For a while they stood in silence, watching the star burn. Elias felt a strange peace settle in him. He had thought his 20 years were nothing but emptiness. But now, looking back, he saw them as something else entirely. A long road walked without breaking. A lesson not just for himself, but for others. Humanity's story was not one of despair, but of quiet strength. As the star pulsed faintly one last time, Elias placed his hand against the glass. "When this star dies, it will not be the end," he said softly, almost to himself, "because we will still carry meaning. That is what humans do." Serene's voice was like a whisper of wind through crystal, and because of that, others will walk with you. Elias turned to her, and for the first time in 20 years, he did not feel frozen. He felt ready, not for answers, but for the path ahead, whatever it might hold. And in that quiet moment, he understood at last what it meant to endure, not as a burden, but as the very fire of being human.